Hey, baby dolls, do you believe in the afterlife? I'm listening to this podcast, right? And this guy has done 4,000 surveys and interviews of people who have had near-death experiences. They call them NDEs. It's the world's largest study, okay? And it's the best evidence for afterlife. It's actually interesting. Now, there's a crazy part in here, and guess what? I'm only just 13 minutes through. So there's 4,000 accounts, and there's so many similarities about what happens when, like, when you die. They're all near death, right? And your consciousness, like, leaves your body, and you float up, and you can see and talk and stuff. You know what I want to know? It's funny. I don't know if you guys remember when I cut my hand. Okay, I sliced my hand. I spoke to the nurse. So there was a doctor. He was stitching me up. And then they said, like, oh, yeah, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, well, you know, I'm just a bum. I'm just thinking this crypto thing. And they're like, oh, this crypto thing, right? And I'm like, look, random question. Do you see a lot of people, like, dying? And they're like, yeah. And I say, does spooky stuff ever happen? She goes, oh, yeah, it happens all the time. I'm like, what? She goes, yeah. I go, what will happen? She goes, yeah, whenever someone passes away, like in the hospital, there'll be many times the room just full blacks out. The light goes off and on. There's been like random stuff. Yeah, they pass away, just like weird electrical things when someone passes away. And I'm like, you basically just like you've had first evidence yourself of like ghosts are real. There's an afterlife stuff, and they don't even think anything of it. Like, yeah, who cares? Anyway, because they've just seen it so many times. Now, what's interesting, right, is I've heard stories of. I'm sure you've had there's thousands of these accounts. People will die on the hospital bed or the surgery table, and then they'll like temporarily die. But then when they die, they float up, and they can see their body, and they can actually see what's going on. Now, there's been some accounts, right? That was interesting. There was one story where someone, when they basically died on the operating table momentarily, when they floated up, they could see the items on the top of the shelf inside, like so high up. They knew, oh yeah, there's these random items here and there. Now, obviously, like people will probably say, oh well, it doesn't mean much, right? But when you see, like, bro, there's 4,000 of this. Like, come on. Now, this guy, friends, this is what's most interesting, right? And I'm just 13 minutes through this. I'll link it for you if you want. But that's all. Just give you goosebumps just going through this. He says, this is the crazy part. Out of 4,000 cases, there were 20 cases where 2 people had the near-death experience simultaneously. They both died together. And you want to know what the trippy part is? Their consciousness dragged out of their body, and they both were speaking to each other. They were both going, hey, our body's down there. We're actually dead. Oh, yeah. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that wild? That's actually true, right? Now, a few people, friends, they talked to me about this thing called Astral Projection. And when I heard it, I was like, it sounds like, you know, like, it literally sounds like one of like the wizard moves that you learn when you're like level 8. You're playing like an RPG game, Astral Projection. But actually, friends, you can actually learn this. It's actually interesting. There's a musical frequency you can train your mind to. Now, people have done it, but it's basically, I read about it. It's not worth it. you practice for a long, like month after month after month after month. And you basically get your brain used to all these octave waves, and then you can basically train yourself, and then you can then, right, basically meditate, but you can see yourself. You can basically like remove your consciousness from your head. You basically like see your body in a room, okay? And what's interesting about this is this astral projection stuff. So it's basically, look how they draw it. They draw it like, you know, your spirit leaving your body. There's a lot of hippies and stuff going on here, right? But so you always see like stuff like this. You're like, you know, they look a bit like off chops. You know what I mean? This is the type of stuff. Now, if you've ever, friends, played any competitive game or sport, or even just watch world star athletes, there's something in their brain where they have a 3D awareness of the game, right? It's not like ears and sensory. There's a sixth sense. Messi on the football field. for example, okay? They're like, they just know where everything is. They really do have something in their brain where they can just see like a 4D view of everything. They know where everything is, right? And they don't have to watch. So we know this type of stuff, it's out there and it exists. And I mean, it was crazy just to see this guy does this near-death experience stuff. And by the way, it's like the best evidence for afterlife stuff. Now, what happens in the afterlife? No one, of course, no one really knows. But after then, it gets pretty nuts, right? But it's interesting just to hear this stuff because, you know, we're in crypto markets and you see all our emotions sync. They really do sync. And we feel good, we feel bad, and it gets printed on the chart, right? And then you see these weird pre-programmed FUD, simulation things. Okay, you see all this happening, and then everyone's like, conspiracy. What? World zombie virus? We gotta get another jab. You know what I mean? You're seeing all these. Now, where does it all go in the future? Who knows? Who knows? But everyone's got their own theories and stuff. There's a lot of like ancient gospel, Buddhist teachings. A lot of people believe your soul kind of like goes to heaven, or like you basically just do a loop, you come back. I'm sure, I don't know if you guys know this. Trust me, I thought this one was fake, but past life experience memories, there are like thousands and thousands and thousands of reported cases of children before the age of 4 have a past life memory. So the child's out, they're like, oh yeah, I'm this guy and I lived over here. You know, literally there's been cases that the child will remember their death, their name, and it's not make-believe people. The people lived. So it's not like, oh, they're just making up random names. No. It's like, my name is Charles, you know, like, and I was this, and I worked at a factory, and like, yeah, that place, there was someone who did that, and they died, you know, like some number of years ago. So these types of stuff, it's kind of spooky, but also it kind of makes sense too. You know what I mean? It makes sense. It makes you always wonder, I wonder how I can get another edge. That's what I'm always thinking about. It's mind-blowing, but also it's inspirational because you get to see like, oh, well, if this stuff is all possible, then really there is no limit. There is no limit, friends. You can almost, if you just focus and manifest hard enough, and get the answer. Remember, we're always trying to look for that 1% edge. Even though it's just markets, we're just like monkeys playing around with the digits. I'm going to let this researcher dude speak. He just repeat what I said before.
Kind of evidence for the reality of near-death experience is called shared near-death experiences. We have about 20 people where there were 2 or more people that simultaneously had a life-threatening event. And they both had consciousness apart from the body. Most of the time in this series, they're able to see each other, communicate with each other, and often have dramatic discussions like, wow, there's our bodies down there, and here's our consciousness up above. So shared near-death experiences in my series of about 20 do exist. They're typical near-death experiences, but there's 2 people interacting that, while their physical body is unconscious or clinically dead below. In my series,
let's check this out, friends.
Have you heard of, I think this is another thing that Kripal was telling me about, but there's a phenomena with young children having memories of previous lives. And they're having memories of
I haven't watched this before
in previous lives or violent deaths.
See,
and
straight away
he's connecting. He made a connection to trauma. So like like violent or extremely physical or emotional traumatic experiences having to do with this brain filter opening up, right, and letting in more. And there's been many people, some of which I've had on the show before, who had lives filled with trauma and just terrible childhoods that now have these crazy paranormal, phenomenal, unexplainable experiences in their daily lives. And these children, going back to these children who claim to have memories of previous lives, they were overwhelmingly male in their previous lives. And the reason Jeff believes his idea of why this is because in the past, in history, males were far more likely to die violent deaths than females.
Yeah.
In one of the past life deaths, I'm not joking, there was a kid, and he said, yeah, past life, blah, 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 verified. And the way he died he was killed by a tractor on a farm. It ran over him, basically squished him. So it's very interesting when I hear all these past life. I never thought, oh yeah, they were all violent deaths. It was just that they remembered the death. Interesting, right?
That's fascinating. You're getting into the topic of, in the scholarly literature, they call it cases of reincarnation experience, or core, but that's basically pointing at reincarnation.
Right, right. And it's interesting that children have it. It's children that are like on the cusp. It's before they actually learn language. Yeah. Before they can actually speak and have a conversation in whatever language they're going to learn, right? Like there's some weird little pocket there. Where before their consciousness gets like hardwired to society or something.
And while that's absolutely fascinating, I would say there's been some very good, serious research, you know, in addition to what Dr. Krippel's been describing. There's a Dr. Ian Stevenson that has done a great deal of study about this kind of cases of reincarnation experience. There's literally been hundreds of these types of experiences identified in research like this, and I think it offers a very strong, compelling argument. But you're right, mainly it's children, and often very young children. Other researchers are seeing that too, that remember their prior lives. Interestingly, as these very young children get older, they seem to lose that that memory, and so they don't really retain it. It's very unusual. One reason I'm so fascinated about that is we have this concept of reincarnation quite regularly expressed in near-death experiences. And I'm going to admit this, okay? When I started my near-death experience research, I thought, no way, reincarnation doesn't make any sense. I didn't believe in that stuff at all. However, I'm led by evidence. And so over and over, and we're talking about way over hundreds at this point of near-death experiences I've studied, do talk about remembrance of a prior life. Now, in my reincarnation evidence in near-death experiences, there's not that predisposition for males. They say their prior life or lives that they remember. Interestingly, even if they're a male or female in this life, they may have been a male or female in prior lives, but or you know, had multiple sort of different genders, often going back. So I'm not really seeing that preponderance of males. And also in near-death experiences, there's not that preponderance of remembrance of a traumatic death. When you have reincarnation discussed in near-death experiences, and maybe that's the explanation, they're just living mundane lives. I mean, I wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe it if everybody talked about that they were Cleopatra in a prior life. Well, you just don't see that in near-death experiences. When they do remember and have some details of their prior life, I mean, they're very mundane, very what you would have expected from decades to centuries ago. Nothing what we'd call particularly special, but it is that remembrance, and often a very detailed remembrance of their life or prior lives. So again, near-death experiences times now hundreds, providing some further lines of evidence for the reality of near-death experience. And I guess to convince myself, because I was such a skeptic of reincarnation, I guess I kind of looked at it from the point of view that if you really believe we're in a universe of infinite possibility, then to say something is impossible or can't happen, well, you're on thin ice. And so I think that's part of the rationale that if we're really in a universe where anything's possible, well, that would, by definition, include reincarnation. And now with near-death experiences and Dr. Krippel and other researchers, there's some really pretty solid evidence that that really happens.
Have you ever dealt with like a young child who had a near-death experience? Did those differ from older people?
Well, glad you asked, because I've actually studied that. So I'm very curious as a researcher about whether near-death experiences in very young children, my study group was age 5 and younger. The median and average age was 3.5 years old. These are very young children. And shoot, Danny, they're practically a cultural blank slate at that young age. I mean, gosh.
So yeah, friends, they do go a lot through this. What do you guys think? I mean, I've seen enough. It's pretty obvious. It's true. It's all real. There's a lot of things going on here. I'm sure the government knows. Of course they know, friends. There's a lot of the weird stuff out there. But, hey, I don't know. I mean, like, you got ancient texts where they kind of say, well, humans, you had a lot of power, then you kind of messed it up, so we got to, like, shorten your lifespans and, like, make you a bit more closed. And you hear that, friends. You just kind of like, you know, it sounds like every premise to every, like, ancient movie, science fiction stuff I've ever heard. And then as you get older, you're like, interesting, right? At the end of the day, friends, I mean, these are all cool, fun stories. You can enjoy listening to them and watching them more while you sip on cocktails on a beach, hopefully because you retired from crypto. That's what we're ultimately here to do. But yeah, this 6th sense, man, this 6th sense. It's crazy. It's a genius. It's a peanut brain. Something else is going on there, okay? And yeah, I want to know what you think. Let me know. Catch you soon.